Hey guys, I just wanted to show you this great wheel I had built recently. What I've got here is just this little wheel that it travels like this. You can actually band it around here and then take it wherever you want. And then when you get to where you're going, you throw it all together. I'm going to show you really quick how it goes together, and then once I have it up, I'm going to do a little spinning on it for you. Alright, first off, you do the wheel, and this is the drive wheel completely. There's a whole lot of just taking these nuts off and getting it ready. So as you pull them kind of off here, you just lay them down to the side. Dun, dun, dun. Alright, so we've got all the washers and nuts out. And then the way this is held together is by a couple bolts and wing nuts. And so what we have to do is we put the bolts just go in here in the front, and then you hold them up as you put the wing nuts on the back. I had to countersink holes in both sides to get this done so that there wasn't anything sticking out of the front or the back while it's spinning around. But that wasn't too hard. I kind of like the way it turned out. So then once you've got this drive wheel together like that, you'll assemble the axle, which is easy enough. This is the most time-intensive part. The rest of it goes up pretty quick. But anyways, you run this nut down on it, and then you can set this drive wheel aside until you get the structure built. Now the structure just scissors out. Alright, so this you saw was stuck to the wheel originally. It also fits in here if you want to secure it that way, with the wheel sitting on top. But anyways, this comes out, this scissors this way, and this board will fall right in that slot. You can tighten down the wing nut. Then once you slide this notched piece in here, you're done with that. That is the structure, except for this drive wheel going on right here. Then on the back, you put the washer on. And you tighten down the wing nut, but you hold pressure up on the wheel while you tighten that down so that the axle's lifted right. Once you have it that far, you can put the drive belt on and you're good to go. Now the benefit of having a traveling great wheel is that as you can see, it's kind of large as far as wheels are concerned, but the way it breaks down makes it easy to hold on your lap while you're driving somewhere, or to stow in the rear of the car. if you need to, but it's pretty handy. And then you set your chair right next to it and you actuate the wheel while spinning off the tip. So let me go get my quill and chair, some fiber, and we'll get started. Alright, so now we're going to use some of this white wool here, and hope it shows up well against the dark background. I just pull off, because I'm going to need to do a long draw, I just pull off a very little bit of wool, and I kind of make sure that I card it really lofty, really fluffy, so that it's easy to pull apart. I'm not looking for any kind of compressed fiber to draw out, and I'll show you why we do that. We actually need to have something that is very, very feathery. And I'll get this one started. Dum, dum, dum. Okay, because you're going to need to be pulling back against the spindle tip, and you don't want to put a lot of weight on your spindle tip anyways, but you're really going to want your yarn to kind of sit still while you move the fiber back off of it. You don't really want to have to pull any of the fiber apart. And as you can see, I can draft this pretty easily with one hand because none of this fiber is compressed. And hopefully that's showing up pretty good against the wall as well. But the nice thing is, it doesn't take hardly any effort at all to move this drive wheel with your right hand. And of course, since you're doing a long draw, it's really easy with your left hand to operate your bat or whatever you'd like to spin from. And that's it. If you ask me, when it comes to spinning on a great wheel using the long draw, the work is really done in your carding, not in your drafting. Because if you card it wrong, if you put too much fiber in there, or if you get the wool all compressed together, there's not a whole lot you can do just pulling on it with your hand back here. But if all of the material is light enough to pull off, it's really easy to do that as you're adding twist and moving back away from the yarn that you've just spun. As you can see, it goes pretty quick too, because every time I wind on, that's a yard of yarn, and I'm ready to go forward about as quick as I come back. Okay, we'll do a little more this time. It looks like the same amount, but actually that first part I put on there was quite a bit more compressed, which means as I card it, it's going to fill out itself on the comb quite a bit more. Oh, and I don't card into row lags. I'm sure there's a reason for that, but I'm just taking what I've got off of the brush and just drafting from one end of it. And that works well for me, so I don't worry about any other kind of more specific preparation. But like right here, I've already got the two combs worth, and then I'll pull them apart. One a lot of times will be a little less densely compacted than the other, I usually do that one first. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the long draw, you might notice that as I'm drafting back, it's actually pretty uneven, but as I add twist, it kind of evens itself out. That's just one of the miracles of long draw. The thicker places in the fiber really can't have a lot of twist put into them because they have so much more fiber in those clumps. And so the thinner places are getting twisted up pretty good, and they're latching onto themselves. So the thicker places being under twisted actually have more draft in them to be pulled out. So what happens is the whole thing kind of evens itself as it goes. And that's pretty fun once you learn how to make use of that. It's really neat to see it happen in your drafting, that the fiber kind of self-regulates. I've gotten too thin here, and I've got to come back up here with more fiber and add it in so that that part isn't thin when I go back to ply it together. So once it's plied, thin parts aren't really going to be much of an issue. Thin yarn that's plied is still going to be strong and resilient and not too prone to breaking, but thin singles can, depending on where they are on your lazy Kate, like if they're near the end of your bobbin or the end of your quill, they can pull in too, because when you get into the end of your bobbin's creating more drag, or your quill is creating more drag because there's a greater number of revolutions for the same amount of yarn. So when you're pulling singles off of a lazy Kate, you can have a better chance of breaking stuff at the end of your quill or at the end of your bobbin than you do at the beginning, because at the beginning there's not a lot of spin on that bobbin or on that quill, because it's so fat it doesn't have to make as many revolutions around while you're taking 2 or 3 inches of fiber off of it. So that's why that changes. But yeah, this draft's really nice. The funny thing with winding on is it's a little less convenient than, let's say, a treadle spindle wheel where you have both hands to affect the wind on. With this one, you've only got your one hand, so it can be a bit awkward bringing it back across here so that it can wind on. As you see, I just go up over my head. I'm sure there are other things you can do, but because you can't use your second hand, you're not able to draft back quite as far as you would on something where you had both hands free and you could take out some of that slack as you wound on. I don't really find it a problem, but it is worth making note of. If you're doing it at a spin-in or a spinning group, people are going to keep thinking that you're raising your hand, but you're probably used to that when you're using the drop spindle anyways, trying to get every inch of drafting out of your fiber. You're always lifting your hand up high, so same thing happens with a great wheel. Well, I should say most great wheels aren't done in the same way. You're not sitting down while you're using them. Most you stand at. I'm not really sure why that is. Most of them are pretty large. I get that, but it really doesn't seem. Well, I should just say the reason escapes me why they didn't have it made in such a way that they could sit at it instead of stand. I know people call certain great wheels walking wheels, and they did that because they would really draft out quite a ways, but I don't believe anybody was willing to stand up to get twice as long draft before winding on, because winding on really isn't an issue. And if you've used a wheel, even a walking wheel, long enough to get that long draw draft down, then you don't have any problem with the wind-on. So that excuse doesn't really hold up. The only thing I can think of is, they weren't building wheels for the drive wheel. They were repurposing wheels that they already had. And the wheels they already had were so large that it wouldn't fit itself to this kind of deal. But that's all I could see is they had a big wheel, so they had to stand up because it stood so tall and it spun with such a great. This is 22-to-1 is the ratio here. And of course, on a lot of these walking wheels, not only do you have a smaller bobbin on this end, or not bobbin, but a smaller pulley on this end than what I have, because my pulley on this end is, it's an inch across. A lot of them would have pulleys not much larger than the actual spindle itself, and then their drive wheels would be considerably bigger. So that is a lot of twists. That's very little movement in the drive wheel and quite a bit of drafting in the long draw. But I would still think that with all of the labor that a woman had to put in during the day, this would be one activity that she would prefer to sit down while doing. So I don't know, maybe they had some superstition about sitting while you work. All right. Of course, it's easy to join. I will say, too, that the nice thing about great wheels are, well, for one, they allow you to have a greater ratio than treadle wheels. And the explanation for that's pretty advanced, so it's not something that I would care to go into on the podcast. But because you can have such higher ratios, the drafting is quite a bit easier, because high ratios really allow you to keep things connected that you normally wouldn't be able to connect. That's why you spin cotton at such a high ratio, is because the high ratio really does a lot of the drafting for you, or at least a lot of the grip and grab. So yeah. Oh, all right. So we just got a break. Being a spindle wheel, you just pull that out like this, run it along the second strand you have, and should be able to form a join pretty easy. And keep going. It's not any harder on a flyer wheel, but sometimes you have to dig the yarn out, and then the flyer is actually pulling against you, so that can make it difficult for some people. It's not necessarily the wheel's issue, it's just how convenient it is for the drafter themselves to work against the pull of the flyer while they're trying to join the two yarns back together, where with the spindle wheel you don't have to worry about that because it doesn't pull on the yarn. Now, it might not look like I'm getting a lot of twist in here, but that's actually the opposite. I have more of a chance of over-twisting the yarn on this wheel than I do with my treadle wheels. With my treadle wheels, I usually have a pretty even and twisted yarn, where here, a lot of times I have to watch it when I'm plying, because I add quite a bit of twist when I'm doing it this way. do like the great wheel, though. It's very relaxing to twist by hand, and it's also very rhythmic to have your hands doing two separate things at the same time, as opposed to just setting a rhythm with your foot and then working up top with two separate hands. I don't find that as enjoyable or rhythmic or whatever you want to call it. I do kind of like this quite a bit better. Now, ideally, a great wheel is no slower than a treadle wheel. I know the perception is that, once you're able to pedal, you can go faster, but that's just not the case. This is, not only do great wheels have the potential for higher ratios, which can speed things up, but don't necessarily. But there's nothing that's slowing you down just because you're twisting it by hand. The only thing I would complain about is because you only have one hand free when you are doing this issue to wind on, even though it doesn't take a lot of time, it probably technically does take 50% more than when you're treadling, because I would say you can get a yard at a time when you're using a great wheel, even if the wheel's bigger and stuff, because it has to do with your proximity to the spindle tip, not to the ratio or the size of the wheel. And that's if you want to sit down. So if you want to sit down, you're wanting to sit close enough to that spindle tip where you can draft back a little more than a yard, and then when you wind on that yard, you have a little more to get started back again. Now with a treadle wheel, it does seem like you can go about 1.5 yards away, because then you're able to cut that area in two as you're winding on. So we should see that a treadle wheel would have 50% increase in wind on, but wind on isn't all that you're doing when you're spinning yarn on a spindle wheel. As a matter of fact, wind on isn't even 50%. Wind on is a very short part of spinning on a spindle wheel. It's so fast that it does not account for much. So the difference between a hand spun drive wheel and a treadle wheel is negligible, with the treadle wheel being a bit faster in the wind on, but no faster in the spinning. And all of the same issues apply with plying, of course. It's just as fast to ply on a great wheel or a hand cranked drive wheel as it is on a treadle wheel, except the uptake on the treadle wheel can be 50% faster because of the fact that you're able to do in 2 wind-ons what you have to do in 3 wind-ons, I guess is a good way to explain it, on a hand crank. Although I will say that it is probably easier to ply on a great wheel. I do think that you can add the counter twist in multiple plies quicker and easier. You have a much more even flow from what you're doing when you're dealing with a hand cranked drive wheel. That is my experience, at least. I think this is the last little bit we're going to go, and then we'll probably pull it off and call it good for this week. So I'm hoping you're enjoying the videos. Every now and then my iPhone will kick off recording before I'm done, so if you ever see the video just fade out while I'm talking, you're not missing much. I cut it where I thought it could be cut, but that's due to the fact that not long after that my iPhone made the decision for me anyway, so I just find a break in the conversation and trail off.